This episode is partially brought to you by the Humble Choice program. Did you know Humble Bundle has a great monthly subscription service that lets you get a ton of video games every single month? That's right, from plans range from $5 to $20 a month, you get a hold of a bunch of free games they have available to you. And you could use our code down in the description below to go and sign up. It would help our podcast and help you see what great games are available for you this month.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to one of these interview episodes of the SWW show. First interview I've done in 2022. Today I have with me a special guest. I'm sorry there's no AJ. We're still working on getting those interviews back to normal. But a special guest today to talk about their game, Underspace. So to get us started, do you mind introducing yourself and kind of give the elevator pitch for the game we're here to talk about?
Hi, my name's Kevin Brock. I'm the lead developer with Space Interactive. Most folks know me as TrainWiz. And the game we're working on is Underspace, which I describe as an open-world Lovecraftian space fighter RPG. The basic idea is that whatever allows for faster than light travel also creates these strange, monstrous, hyperspatial storms that blow across the galaxy. And anywhere they hit, they spew forth anomalies and monsters and just generally make the world not fun. So you are a government-contracted freelance storm chaser and monster hunter whose job it is to go inside these storms and clear it out to make it safe for settlement and passage. In practice, of course, this just gives us an excuse to send you all across the galaxy, finding strange things, doing quests, and generally becoming a stronger character and getting more equipment and money to face down stronger challenges.
So I've got to ask, 'cause obviously there's a lot, it's a very dense kind of thing in the way you said it there. Where did you guys kind of come up with this game? Because obviously there are pieces there that kind of sound like kind of pieced together, but combined it sounds like a decently dense sci-fi world.
So the original pitch, I originally pitched this to the studio Human Head, which I worked at for a while. So the original idea was this was mostly a normal, kind of an open-world space fighter RPG, similar to games like Freelancer or Everspace or No Man's Sky or what have you. But they really wanted a hook. And we had at the time this idea that there would be some sort of like weather or anomaly system across the galaxy. And I'm a huge Elder Scrolls fan. I've done work with Bethesda and stuff. And I really wanted to incorporate more fantastical elements into the space sim scene. So I thought about expanding on that weather and anomaly system a little bit more, and it became kind of the central axis around which the entire world became based. And that's where the idea of making it more of a fantasy space sim kind of came from.
Wow, that's I think it's very interesting. So I kind of want to touch a bit on kind of this moment-to-moment gameplay, because obviously what you said there, obviously you kind of talk about kind of this broad idea, but like when a player sits down and plays for like the hour chunks, we kind of walk through a little bit more kind of what they expect, kind of.
So the moment-to-moment gameplay is definitely, if you've played a game like Skyrim or Freelancer is a big inspiration, of course. The moment-to-moment gameplay is the player will be traveling through this galaxy, as it were. We separate each system out, and they're connected by jump gates and jump holes and unstable jump holes and different wormholes to actually connect them. But each individual zone, as you're wandering about, you might be flying along and you'll enter a nebula and there'll be a notification that there's a storm active here and you can hunt that storm. Or you might be doing some deep space scans and those will highlight points of interest for you and show possible areas you can go to discover, like a miniature quest or like a space dungeon or something like that. Or you'll just be wandering about and suddenly you'll get like a distress signal from somebody. Or you'll overhear like three scrappers arguing over some strange artifact. And you have to do a quest to figure out who deserves that strange artifact. So it's very much, the moment-to-moment gameplay is very much your typical open-world RPG loop of exploration to gather materials or complete some sort of task. And then instead of towns, of course, we have stations and planets which you'll land on, and that's where you do like your maintenance on your ship, or equip new items, or read the message boards to find out possible stories you can pursue, or just talk to people to get more quests.
One of the things I'm always curious about in games like this, and just generally speaking, is it sounds like there is a lot of options for the player, or at least on paper, there's a lot of options. How is it that you guys are going about kind of onboarding the player and making sure they don't feel like too lost kind of in this experience?
One of my core philosophies is to let the player make things as complicated as they want for themselves by their own choices. So when the game starts, we have our introductory cutscenes, which introduce the player and the world and stuff. And after that, it'll give you a brief tutorial on where to go. And then you've basically got three options at this point. You can pursue the main campaign, which is our main quest, and that has it's kind of a tutorial at first. It'll walk the player through the basics of combat and flight and exploration. There's an in-game, sort of like a simulation object you can go to, and that puts you in a tutorial zone where you're free to experiment how you want. And it has an automated system that will walk you through all those systems. And then there's an in-game manual. But if you're just like, I just want to figure it out myself, you can launch to space instantly, and you can completely ignore the main quest, you can completely ignore the tutorial, and you can go off and smack into a planet or get eaten by a ghost starship. It's totally your choice.
Yeah, that's definitely one of those nice little broad level of what players can do. Is there anything that's like your favorite kind of like if you sit down and I assume right now it's in that like kind of testing phase or whatever for the experience that like you kind of always kind of are drawn to?
For me, I definitely think one of my favorite parts of the game I like making and testing out boss fights and stuff. The game has a lot of, if you go off the beaten path or pursue a point of interest that seems to be moving around, it's usually going to turn out to be some sort of ancient boss or combat challenge, and we do a lot of creative stuff there. A lot of bosses come up as almost like a mechanics test. Like there's different bosses in each region that will test your particular skill in an area. Like one is very, very fast and has tons of missiles coming in, and that kind of tests your skill as like being capable to fly and dodge things. There's another one that how to damage it is you actually have to shoot off specific parts that it fires at you. So that tests your skill at aiming. And there's a lot going on with bosses and content and stuff. But I like making bosses. I like fighting bosses.
Bosses are one of those things in games that I always argue are either done really well or suck. Because I think to me, bosses that are best kind of either have a unique thing to them or test your skills, and then bosses I think are always horrible or kind of like just bullet sponges or just like a bigger enemy that does nothing. How are you kind of going through and like kind of balancing that level of making sure they're tough but not like this impossible thing or just feel like they take too long?
Well, we definitely divide bosses into tiers of expected difficulty. The regions themselves have their zones with their own levels and stuff. Like the starting zone you're in is level 1 to 5. If you go outside, you get to 5 to 15, and so on up to the max level, which is 50. And so within those zones, we have sort of the expected damage per second the player will do, and subsequently the bosses in that are balanced kind of around that in terms of health and complexity. So you start off, like in the demo and stuff, you'll see a few bosses. They're like mini bosses and stuff. They're fairly easy. They don't have a lot of health, and they usually have only one or two mechanics that kind of eases you into the idea that, hey, this is what you're going to expect when you fight these tougher enemies. And subsequently, as you get further and further out, you suddenly get to things that are much more complicated. Some might just be like straightforward, you need to shoot him, but he has a huge amount of attacks he can do against you. Some are more complicated puzzle bosses. For example, in one of the high-level areas, we have a beam that's a huge, invincible, lightning-imbued battleship, and you can't damage it directly, but you can. It'll send out fighters and stuff, and you'll have to destroy those fighters as it sends extra hazards to try and prevent you from destroying the fighters. So there's a lot of different elements to different bosses and stuff, and they're mostly balanced around where we expect players to be in terms of power at that point. But because, like I said, I like to give players a lot of freedom, You are free to just go out wherever, and if you want to be a dinky little fighter fighting like some ancient abyssal space god with your pea shooters, go ahead. It's gonna be hard, but go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm correct me if I'm wrong. That sounds like a bad idea to me, and it sounds like something you're not gonna win.
It's not something you're gonna win, but we give you an achievement if you do win.
So do you think then it's not impossible? I assume you think it's something that's just
It's
hard.
not impossible. You can do it, but it's difficult. It would take definitely a skilled player. There's nothing. I don't like a lot of MMOs have like DPS tests, where it's like the final phase you have to kill it in a certain time frame or you instantly die. Or there's there's a boss that does an undodgeable attack that does a specific amount of damage, and if you don't have health high enough, you die. There's nothing like that. Minus one instance, but that's specifically the mechanic of that boss, is that you have to learn how to make your ship temporarily invincible to dodge its attacks.
Boss sounds like a pain in my butt. That's interesting, actually, kind of. I do appreciate how you are kind of at least keep it with some bosses, some level of mechanics, kind of unique directly to them. So I'm kind of curious, one of the things obviously in a game like this is the idea of your ship, right? Because your ship is your home, you are the ship. Are there ways kind of you're going through this to kind of make it so that each player feels like it's kind of like their ship versus like you giving them options, and kind of how are you balancing that?
You have a ton of customization options when it comes to your ship. If you play the demo now, you'll notice you can paint your ship, you can slap decals on it, you can change the color of the engines and the headlights, you can completely rename the ship, and then we do have a cockpit mode in addition to the third-person mode, and that you can further customize. You can slap on like a photo or a coffee mug or like a space hula girl or other stuff. We have a lot of customization options in terms of both your ship and your character. I like customization options in game. I like personalizing my own ship. So we have a lot of different ships to fly, and pretty much all of them are viable to some extent. Different ship lines, like different manufacturers, play to different strengths. Like there's one ship that's a better mining ship versus a ship that's much faster. But they're all generally expected to be in the same tier of power and potential based on what you buy. So we have 3 different tiers of ships, and then 5 different classes of ships, and then I think about 13 or 14 different ship manufacturers. And so that's how you choose your stats and stuff, and then of course you can outfit them further. You can slap on all kinds of different equipment. We have over around 300 different pieces of guns, armor, special attacks, all kinds of things, and then like I said, you can further paint the ship and customize the interior and stuff.
So what I'm curious about, just from a content creation point of view, is how did you guys make sure that like there's just not like stuff for stuff to be there, but like it matters for a player. Like obviously, I have 50,000 guns, but players are really going to use like the top 100 or 200. I'm kind of curious, kind of what you guys' mindset kind of was going into this approach.
There's definitely not 1 or 2 top guns. Like I said, we divide things into equipment tiers, of course. So it's like, but there's a vertical progression, but there's also that horizontal progression aspect. So some equipment is obviously better than others. We have armor tiers, for example, which boost your ship's health, and that's on a flat, like, vertical progression. Like the class 10 armor is obviously better than the class 1 armor. But when we get down to guns and stuff, the class 1 guns might be worse than the class 10 guns. But the class 10 guns will have a wide variety. Some might be very slow but high damaging, others might be fast firing but low damage. We have guns that do very little damage but take very little energy to fire. And then once we get into special attacks, those have a wide variety of things that can apply, because you only get one special attack. For example, you might have a rail gun that's a constant stream firing beam that does heavy amounts of damage, but you have to aim it. There's another one that can create a huge AoE field, which is really good for taking down groups of fighters. Or you might want something that's more support-based. You can have something that makes your ship do double damage for a small amount of time, or you can project a field that heals you and your allies while you're inside it. So it definitely comes down to there's a lot of ways to play, and you will be seeking stronger equipment and stuff, and there's various ways to acquire that stronger equipment, and there's lots of different challenges and viable routes to build your character. But there is, even if a meta like play style emerges, there's so much variety that I think a lot of builds will be viable for pretty much most content.
It's very interesting, and I can only imagine that's a pain in the ass to balance and stuff. If you're kind of like playing, is there any, even broadly speaking, any kind of like playstyle that you kind of really drawn to? Because I know you said you mess with bosses a lot, so I can imagine your playstyle might be different than players kind of like immediately kind of playing the game.
I like my ships to be fast, so I always go for, we have light fighters, which are the very, not heavily armed or armored, but very, very maneuverable fast ships. I always go for those kinds of ships because I like to zip around and strafe and weave and basically try to do my best to actually avoid damage. So that's my preferred playstyle. Some players might prefer to be more like a heavily armored freighter. We have a lot of like secret synergies you can unlock. For example, there's one ship that doesn't seem particularly strong, but it's got a lot of like self-repair capacity, and you can modify it well enough that the thing is basically this unstoppable tank, even though it's not got a lot of firepower or anything else in return.
That's I feel like I would probably be similar. At the same time, I could see where we're talking about these bosses that are very tanky, how hard that could be. Is there any kind of like scenarios where you've seen in playtesting where like one type of strategy seems to be better, or have you guys kind of made a point at least trying to at least let multiple types of like, here's the fast player, here's the tanky player, and you can keep doing that, or is it like bosses I have to switch it up?
Well, you're allowed to own multiple ships. That's one thing we wanted to have from the start. You can own multiple ships, and there's garages across the galaxy where you can quickly swap in and out of them. So you can have multiple characters, basically, you can switch between. But I haven't seen one particular play style emerge. The demo is not that wide in content, but from some of the people who have played it for a very long time, I've seen people go for heavy fighters and try to be tankier, and more skilled players go for things that are more maneuverable because they realize they can get away with just avoiding attacks.
Yeah, that's a very interesting. I think it's very interesting. Again, I just go back to, because a lot of my background's design is, I just started thinking of just logistically on your guys' end that I feel like this sounds like nightmares, just because obviously it's so much of this. Oh, this seems right. Go to playtest it and like someone gets destroyed in 2 seconds. Have you had to like tone stuff down kind of throughout development, or have you guys kind of got that?
One of the things we definitely look for is the sort of the time to kill, which is like if the player is at an expected level of power for this area, how long do the enemies take to kill? And that's been, excuse me, something we've carefully balanced out. At the same time, I grew up with games like Morrowind and stuff. And if a player ends up being completely overpowered, we're not too concerned over that. It is an RPG, and one of the things I like about those genres of games is the sense of progression. You know, at the start, pirates attacking you on highways and stuff are going to be a problem, but by the end of it, you're literally so powerful that they will run in fear of you because they can tell how strong you are. And I like that feeling.
Gee, I do like that feeling a lot. I think an interesting comparison I come back to in my head right now is, very recently that the Pokemon remakes came out, and one of the complaints of those is that the balance was relatively off so quickly for a lot of people that they could just kind of sail through the middle of the game without doing anything. And I think that is the RPG problem of, you could get too powerful too quickly that the system doesn't catch up to you. Do you guys kind of try to fight that still, at least, or is it kind of like, we kind of create this base thing and now we're kind of just letting players just kind of do what happens?
We let players experiment. Like I said, you can become very overpowered, but at the same time, there are some extremely powerful enemies out there that, even if you are overpowered, are basically going to test your limits. And like I said, we divide things into different zones, so the more powerful you get, you're generally going to start seeking out stronger and stronger challenges, which makes you go to deeper and deeper parts of the galaxy. And then, of course, the storm system and such. We have a few twists on things, like, for example, we have sort of a legendary / Eximus / elite unit system where some NPCs and ace pilots will spawn with their own special abilities, and those drop special pieces of equipment and items, and they provide more of a stronger challenge. And then anywhere the galaxy has storms, it actually kind of increases the level of that system that it's in, and you start encountering more and more stranger enemies within that system based on the intensity of the storm.
I feel like that at least gives you guys a relatively long-term, easy design way of like creating new content, or where it makes sense to at least let it be new content kind of appearing. Where like, is there? Let's kind of jump in through these plans. So obviously, as we're talking, the game, as you said, there's a demo that has kind of existed out for you guys. The game is still coming out as of now, some point this year. As of right now, we're talking it's January of 2022. To start with, is 2022 still plans? Was there any more specific kind of concrete time for you guys coming out?
2022 is the plan. I keep telling people the end is in sight, but it's a ways off. We have basically a huge amount of content is there, but the main blockers that I've kind of detailed is that basically we have to implement the remaining quests, go back over points of interest, bosses and stuff, and make sure those work and those fit together. And then basically it comes down to filling out the remaining content. And that can be done pretty quickly. We have a very good workflow down to basically just pump out these quests once they're designed and written out. But there's a lot to it. This is such a huge scoped game, and outside of artists, I'm basically the only person working on it. So 2022 is the release date I have in mind. I'm dedicated to that as much as possible. But there's always that footnote that says, oh, maybe something will happen. Maybe I'll get COVID and be in the hospital for a week that can screw everything up. But it's definitely what we're aiming for.
This is 2022 asterisk some point, most likely. Also, any game development, I always say, unless the date is yesterday, is always an asterisk next to any game development date. Is the plan then you guys going to go into a full release, an early access release, or is that still kind of a TBD?
It'll be a full release. We'll have, closer to release, we'll have the demo out on Steam, and that'll be much more of the finished product, so you'll have, the full station interiors and fully voiced quests and stuff. But when it releases, it will be the full release. That'll have the multiplayer aspect, the modding, well, the tentative modding. And from there, post-release, we have content plan, and that's things like advanced salvage and EVA mechanics, so you can actually get out of your ship and spacewalk. We'll have new dungeons and high-level challenges, just a lot of post-release plans, but we're not doing early access.
Curious, kind of, because that seems like a game like this, I feel like early access could work decently well, because a lot of this comes down to content and systems. Was there some sort of reason you guys were anti-early access, or did you feel like you just kind of felt like you'd be able to give a better experience if it wasn't?
We felt like when we give players this experience, we want it to be the full experience. We didn't want to string people along for years and years with this early access thing. We do, however, do the regular demo release. That's kind of our version of early access, because like you said, a lot of this is systems at play. And so we get a lot of feedback when people play the game and such to, it's like, oh, this doesn't work. It's like, oh, could these flight mechanics be tweaked here and here? And that's some good feedback. So we don't feel the need to do a full early access and actually charge people money to basically playtest the game for us when we can have a free alternative to that. I want it to be that when players pay for this game and have this game in their hands, it's the full game.
That's a very interesting... I was just curious because obviously right now I feel like it's the opposite of what has been happening for a lot of development houses across the board. That's why I was very curious about that. Because your game, at least on paper, of what we see in early access that works, could hit it. And obviously I think in post-content release, you'll see similar to early access in the sense of, as you said, this game, at least Cassie, will be living and allow you to change with new content and evolutions over time because of the systematic nature of it. With that being said then, obviously we've been talking for over 20 minutes. Is there anything else kind of with the game that stands out that you feel players really need to know kind of going into this tail end of your development? It's
truly is a massive game. Treat this like maybe a Bethesda game in terms of just the amount of content and the amount of hours you can put in. We've had people put over 100 hours into the demo alone, and the early versions only had about 4 of the 70 or so star systems in the game. There's tons of quests, there's tons of bosses, we have multiplayer and single player with their own dedicated campaigns. and also, of course, modding. So this is a big, big game. When you're paying for this, you are definitely getting a lot.
That's interesting. That's great. Now I'm going to ask the ultimate question, at least to kind of see if you have anything you want to have talked about or willing to talk about. Is do you have a rough price range for this game yet, or is that still kind of in house? So you guys are figuring that out.
$20.
So $19.99, whatever, $20 US dollars. And you said it will come out in 2022. As I always like to say, people, whether you're going to check out the game or not, the thing to help every developer is go wishlist the game. The game is Underspace by Pasta Space Interactive. As you can now say, every wishlist helps every developer a ton with Steam's algorithms and all that. Is there any other spot we should be sending people?
Well, we have our website. If you Google Underspace, actually, for one thing, it should be like the second or third result, and that's, I'll send you the link now. That'll just give you a little bit more information about the game, but definitely Steam, wishlisted on Steam. That's our primary platform we'll be distributed on. We're in talks with GOG, Good Old Games, for a potential release there. And, of course, itch.io is another potential platform. So it's not exclusively released on Steam, but Steam is going to be one of our primary platforms. Particularly because, like I said, that multiplayer aspect, it is player-hosted servers. It's not an MMO. It is persistent multiplayer, but it's not an MMO. So you do set up your own servers and such, and so Steam has a lot of tools to help make that much easier.
Yeah, I was about to say, not having dedicated servers makes sense on a team of your size, but obviously there are, as you just said, some level of good things and bad things with that. And I assume that's even when modding comes in and makes it a little bit easier, because it's not dedicated servers.
Yeah, so modding is very similar to Elder Scrolls in that you'll have plugins, and we have a little bit more detailed stuff, like they can detect conflicts between each other. But servers basically, you can host up to 100 people, and you can do whatever you want on those servers. But we're not hosting them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That is, until people realize how expensive servers are, they don't realize how expensive servers are. So there are ways to minimize those costs and use kind of Steam's tools. I 100% understand why that option was chosen.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Well, I want to say thank you for sitting down and talking about the game. Again, if you want to go check it out, it is underspace.com. Check the podcast link below for the website link, which is underspace.pastaspaceinteractive.com. Again, that link will be in the podcast description. Check it out. Obviously, you can Google it. And again, go wishlist the game. All of that good stuff. Again, thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure.
This podcast was a production of the SWW Show. To learn more, go to theswwshow.com. Remember, you can follow the show on Twitter at theswwshow. You can follow me at Mikey_Maroney. You can follow AJ at LowSeatBoy. Remember, new episodes premiere on Friday, 9 a.m. Central Time on anchor.fm/SWW and podcast services around the globe.